Hi.
Get my mic on. How's everyone? Can you hear me, Plainview and Lubbock?
I can hear you.
All right. Is that Judy or Amy? Are you there?
Yes, it's Amy.
Thank you for being there.
Of course.
And Judy, are you there in Plainview?
It's not Judy, it's Celeste. Judy's going to be out for a couple of weeks.
Oh, okay, Celeste. Thank you for being there.
Yes, sir.
All right, students in all classes, here's what I'd like for you to do. I just lost my monitor. Okay, I've got to get back to that. But here's what I want to do. I want you, let me switch this. I'm going to do the evaluation you've done in other classes. Maybe we're going to take a moment to do that. So if you will, get your device out and log on to Blackboard. Click on this course. This is ARTS 1301. Pardon me. And then go to the course evaluation. And if you'll take care of that, that'll be out of the way. So if you need a device, I don't have one. Can you borrow one from someone, or you can do it later? If you can share devices or whatever. I have this. You can come and log into this. But if y'all take a few moments and do this and get that out of the way, we'll have the evaluations done, completed, and I don't think anyone's already done it prior to this, but just take a few minutes and take care of that. This is the week to do this for most of us, and you may have already done it in your other classes. Won't take long, and then we'll get started in the lesson. Okay, give just a couple more minutes for this and get this out of the way, and then we'll move on. Amy, thank you for taking care of the review. I didn't realize till last night that I wasn't sure who was going to be covering this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Celeste, you got the review, didn't you?
No, sir, I haven't gotten a review.
Is there a way you can ask the secretary to check? Judy's email?
I can email it to her.
Okay, thank you.
Celeste, it's Smith, right?
Yes, it is. It's Smith.
Okay, I just sent it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hopefully y'all will get the review, and I will post those later and send emails for those that miss, as I always do. But if, how many are finished with your review? Show your hand, okay. All right, good. I mean evaluation. I'm on review. Got that in my mind. Now, if y'all can finish up, and then we'll get started. Pick up where we left off last time. Is everyone finished with your evaluation? If you haven't, finish that up real quick, and then we're gonna move on. Remember that today, let me switch my camera back to me. There we go. I'll leave that on there for just a moment, and then we'll switch to the other screen. Today, we're going to finish up with architecture and then talk about graphic design and then crafts. So we'll finish up this unit next week on Tuesday. We will review. My reviews are going to get shorter, and things are going to be more compacted. So study and study well. But I'll review, and then we'll take the test, and then we'll start on Unit 4. Unit 4 is a very short unit. It's only one chapter. So that will go fairly quickly. I'll finish that by Thursday. And then the following Tuesday, we'll take the test. And I'm sorry they kind of run together, but at least they're not every class like you have in some classes, right? So anyway, we're gonna get there. So I'm gonna go to architecture for just a moment. Let me switch cameras here, back to this. And I want to talk about this. You remember that an arch was revolutionary, because before the arch, they had this post and lintel style, right? And you had upright columns that were, they had to be perfectly vertical to support this weight that was on top of them. And no one sent me, by the way, anything about the columns for their counting. Come on in. You need to do the evaluation. Take one of these. Glad you're here. But no one sent me anything about the Hockley County Courthouse. And in my hand here, I have the Hockley County Courthouse. I'll show it on screen. Now, our good friend who taught at Tech for a number of years, Dr. Elizabeth Loudon, had a setup, and then it became her business. I think she still does this. She does consulting work. But she had a setup, one of the first in the country, one of the best. And she went to Europe. She scanned the pyramids, where they set up laser scanners. And she was an architect and an architect professor at Tech. But they set up laser scanners and scanned different buildings all around the South Plains. And they scanned all the courthouses and historic buildings. They did one at the old Spade Ranch, which is no longer there, so they have a laser scan of it. And she said, once we laser scan these buildings, we could take our laser scans and we could rebuild the facade that's going to be there. And some of the buildings, they went inside. Let me show you this. Put it up on screen here. And so you can see it as a little, our little courthouse here. And, no, we're going to get there. Here we go. This is the Hockley County Courthouse. And open this up just a wee bit more and get my focus on. But you can see Hockley County Courthouse. And what type of columns do we have there? Those are ionic columns. The top, the capital of them. But this thing is laser etched into hardboard from the laser scans that they did at the Hockley County Courthouse. Now, it's pretty, it's flat. It's pretty one-dimensional on each side, so there's no dimension carved in there. And it's just a little box-like thing. But this is an exact copy of the Hockley County Courthouse. And so when they did this, they had already worked on the Statue of Liberty. In fact, they were in the Statue of Liberty and working. Go with me? They were doing this same process in the Statue of Liberty when 9/11 happened. And she said it was very chaotic, and of course they had to leave. There was a lot of security because no one knew if that was going to be a target of the terrorists too. But she said after about a year, the government called them and said, please come back, we want you to finish your scans. So she said, me and my students crawled all over inside the Statue of Liberty, set up our scanners. And Bertoldi, when he made that Statue of Liberty, he had no plan, except a basic one. But she said now, if someone destroyed it, we could rebuild it exactly from her plans. And she had done the Empire State Building, the pyramids, like I said, a number of buildings. But it's pretty amazing using that modern technology to take that and record these buildings in a way that they could be replicated if needed. Let me go back to this now. Remember, the keystone is a very important part of what an arch does, because before it had to be stacked stones and then the keystone came in there. And we talked about how that was used and how the Romans used it. And you remember who invented concrete, right? The Romans did. It's about the time of Christ. They invented concrete. Now, remember this too, that an archway is just broadcast 360 degrees to create a dome. In other words, that technology, or that way of taking the load and the weight and distributing it outward and downward is just a full 360 from an arch. And that creates the dome. And it makes it possible to build a large enclosed open space with supporting walls on the outside. And we talked about different materials that are used for an arch. And you need to put this on your list if you haven't gone to the Gateway Arch and ridden up in that. You need to do that. And we talked about other domes and so on. So I'm going to get down here to, and we talked about what's called sometimes balloon framing, but it's wood frame construction, which you're very familiar with. We talked about cast iron and steel cage and other things, but we finished up the other day, we were talking about shell architecture. And so let me go to slideshow now from this slide. So shell architecture, you see it here, and R. Buckminster Fuller developed this design by using geometric forms. You can see hexagon shapes there, right? And they're all linked together. And his idea was to take something, triangular shapes, hexagonal, pentagonal shapes, and link them together with materials that were fairly light but strong, and you could cover them with any kind of shell. You cover them with stainless steel, aluminum, glass, and so on. So every dome that's made like this, and there's a home in Lubbock that's made with a dome like this. He held several patents. Buckminster Fuller, that's a picture of him there. He even made a postage stamp where they turned his head into a dome, his bald head, which I thought was fun. Bucky is what his friends called him, but Buckminster Fuller was a true genius. And I got to go, one of my graduate classes, the professor canceled class that night and said, we're all going to go over to the Allen Theater Tech, and we're going to hear R. Buckminster Fuller. And I thought, wow, I knew who he was. But about halfway through the lecture, I looked over at my professor, who was a very learned man, and he just kind of smiled, and he kind of shook his head like, Dr. Fuller is way over everybody's head. He was the smartest man in that room that night, and probably in Lubbock that night. But he held numerous patents. He developed this Dymaxion house, which used that technology, but it had this idea of, there's only one of these, I think, existing now at the Henry Ford Museum. But you could move the walls, had a lot of open expanse because of this idea. You could change the shape of the rooms a little bit. Tiny houses are in vogue right now, right? Nothing new for R. Buckminster Fuller. He even developed a Dymaxion car, not real stable because it only had 3 wheels. Anyway, one of those was involved in a pretty bad accident, but I think they still have one of them. But he held a number of patents for the dome system, which we call shell architecture. So put that in your notes. Make sure you have that. So the geodesic dome, or shell architecture, is an innovation, true innovation, and from a true genius, R. Buckminster Fuller. If you've been to Disney World, Epcot, that's what it is. And you see the design in there, and it's a much more complex system, very modernistic, very modern design. These things will withstand amazing stresses. because they're linked together so well. I think I said this, Fuller called this tensegrity spheres, because there were multiple points where they were joined together. And so it was tensile integrity. He made this word tensegrity. But pretty amazing structures. Now, we talked about this already, but I wanted to show you this, how Frank Gehry designed the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. He did this quick gesture drawing. Remember we talked about gesture drawings? To get his concept down on paper, just like Andrew Weiss did, Christina's World. And then he developed it, and of course he did wireframe drawings with his computer, but he just built it out of materials, tagboard, cardboard, mat board, and plastic, and then they built the building from that. And he said, what I've repeated before, if you can imagine something with modern materials, you can build it. No problem. Now, I wanted to mention this. I have it on one of the design sheets in the other chapter. But you go to one of the busiest cities on the planet, and you have this space that's about 21 miles long inside the city, and you're in one of the busiest streets, and you better be careful where you walk, because it is a dangerous place to be. And then you walk into forests and woods and lakes. You can go boating, you can go fishing, you can have a soccer game, and you can retreat from the city. And so urban design wasn't their original idea. Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, but they designed this in the 1850s so that people would have a way to get away from the city without having to travel. They could just go to the park. And Central Park is an amazing place. You need to see it when you go there. And of course, this design. Your text has this picture toward the back of the chapter where after there was a disaster in this place in New Zealand, he came back and used cardboard tubes and built this cathedral. And they put a shell, waterproof shell on the outside, and then put stained glass inside there and made this cathedral, this chapel, out of recycled materials. So all kinds of possibilities there. Let me go back to this. I almost lost this. Have any of you seen this? Bruno Steelhouse. Ransom Canyon is just downstream from Buffalo Springs Lake there in Lubbock, just outside, east of Lubbock. And it's perched on the cliff there. Robert Bruno built this. He welded it out of steel, Corten steel, and it was his home for a number of years. I didn't know Bruno well, but that's what they called him, just Bruno. But when Bruno was at Tech, he started a sculpture that's now sitting outside the architecture building. If you go on the Tech campus, you see that big sculpture. They had to crane that thing around, and actually it was on a farm, and then they moved it back to Tech for the architecture building. But he started building this on this property he had bought overlooking the lake there at Ransom Canyon. And if you see the structure there, if y'all are looking at the screen, you see the structure, then you see how he began it. And he just welded these pieces, he cut steel, you can see some of the seam lines for the welds, but then he made these amazing spaces inside, stairs that were welded steel, stained glass. You can go there sometimes on tours. They don't have them as often as they used to. After he passed away, his wife moved. Across the street there's this, they call it the Shell House, and it's got all this mosaic tile on the outside, big ceramic tile. We went around there one time and just looking at it from the outside, and he was there working, welding some of the staircase. So he said, come in and look, and he loved showing it off. But that's a pretty amazing thing to see a structure like that. It's just his imagination, his great imagination. Now I'm going to go, if you're following in your text, we're going to switch back to, because we did sculpture first, then architecture, which I think is more, they're more prevalent things. Remember I said which art form affects your daily life the most? I asked you that question, and you would say what? We just finished with the chapter on what? Architecture. I've had students say painting or drawing. How does that affect your daily life as much as the spaces in which we live, which we take shelter, in which we sleep and are safe? So remember, architecture is the most important. Now, if you're following in your text, go to page 229 and look at graphic design. And graphic design has to do with visual communication. And here is chapter 9. And your text calls it graphic design, but it's visual communication. And it affects our lives too, but our lives don't really depend on it. They just enhance it. It has some images here from the Beijing 2008 Olympics, and it shows how those designs were derived using emblems that are from Chinese characters and then recognizable, easily recognized things. You can see how each of the sports, starting with the equestrian at the top, but just a very simplified horse with a rider, and handball and wrestling and so on. You can see how they use those and develop even designs for the Paralympics, where those people that have handicaps can compete in the Olympics. Those are pretty fascinating. I watched some of the swimming Paralympics this last summer. Did any of you see that? It's like, how can they do that? Pretty incredible athletes. But those designs, and of course the little mascots that they design and so on. But it talks also about the controversy because people were talking about the human rights violations in China. There is slavery today in China, sadly. And if you buy Nike shoes, well, I won't get into that. Anyway, these people were protesting because they said, you know, instead of the Olympic rings, they use handcuffs there. And so they're talking about the whole idea of them taking over Tibet and other places. China is very much a dangerous force in the world today. But all that went into the Olympics and Olympic design, and even these graphic designs here, which have a strong message, don't they? It's easy to see what their message is there. So graphic design is print or digital material that brings an idea across, it communicates a client-specific message to a targeted audience. So they're artworks that are done for a reason. It's not like an artist paints a painting because he's inspired to, or does a sculpture because he's inspired to. This is a commercial enterprise. So someone comes to a graphic artist, a client comes to a graphic artist and says, produce this idea, here's the audience that we want to reach. And they get into all these demographics about how to reach that audience and what so on they can do. But your text on page 233 talks about this. And again, you have to know what your message is, how to communicate it, and what your audience is. So you have to target that audience. So each of these companies, when you see these advertising things on billboards, we have an electronic billboard in front of this campus. You drive along, you see billboards, you see signs, you see advertising all the time on your device, on your phone or your computer. All those are aimed at trying to get you to do one thing, right? To pay attention and to get their product, right? And there are other graphic designers out there that are trying to do things for public service. And they're talking in the text here about the effect that it's hard to measure, but they think that this has had messages like this, like buzz driving is drunk driving. I should probably get a ride home. Probably the word is crossed out. I should get a ride home. And so this idea, and you see all these about texting and driving and paying attention to motorcycles on the road, So all of these from the Ad Council and different, groups, Texas has done a great campaign on texting and driving, not texting, very important. And so those messages sometimes are not just aimed at getting you to buy a product, but getting you to think in a different way. And they're done to reach, audiences, reach all of us with these good messages. Your text has this on page 234, talking about, those poor people in, these countries that are overwhelmed, and this part of this is cut off here, but is talking about the people in Israel doing this to reach the people in Iran and saying, we'll never bomb your country, we love you. And so it's a totally different message than some Iranians are being told by their government. Iran is a very oppressed country, but there is a great desire for freedom there. I read an article not too long ago about how many Christian churches have been started, and they're sort of underground. They have to be underground in Iran because these people have a desire for something more than what they're oppressed by. And it goes, but your text on page 235 talks about how far back graphic design goes. This goes back to 1600 or so BC, or BCE as it says there. But they had these seals, they were on a string or cord, worn as a necklace, that the person could stamp into something and have the seal in I'm not sure if that's cuneiform or what, but they also had this symbolic seal. So that was part of the message of getting something across. And you'll find signs, you'll even find graffiti if you go to Pompeii today, clear signs all over, carved into stone, and probably some that remnants of painted signs. But art forms like posters, they get a message across. They want you to travel by train, this message from this Nord Express, but they're appealing to the eye, right? They get our attention, and it's good design. And your authors talk about a lot of this in graphic design. I'm not going to ask you, but just to think about, you have three parts. You have the image, and you go back to this and you can see the image. Then they chose type, or a font we call it sometimes, and then they looked at their layout or their composition for this to make it appealing to the eye, have this message that is unique, and so different fonts do that. And you have symbols and designs, of course, very simple things like pointing you in a direction, and it talks about Zoo being, having this whole message here, and this is on page 238. This is new to me, so I apologize for not just going. Mr. Black struggles over what to wear. That's the top one. Maybe you get that, maybe you don't. I don't know. Those little emoticons and symbols and so on. And then the second one is Mr. Black makes breakfast. Well, that's a long roundabout way of getting there, but I guess that's you can finally figure that out. Some people have fun with those, but you have those kind of messages, and you have some like this book plate that was designed for a specific person that was very unique and had a different look to it. And typefaces, your text on page 239 talks about different typefaces and fonts. I don't know if any of you have ever designed your own letters, your own initials, or whatever. Some of you have had classes with computer graphics where you design typefaces. There are people today, it's their job to design new fonts, and they have new fonts come out. I have particular ones that I like to use for certain things because they have a different feeling and a different message when you use font. You wouldn't use a font for a cool poster, the same font as you would use for a wedding announcement, right? It's just different. And so it talks about all those, the little thing about the serifs and the thickness of the letter and the thick and thin and so on. And that's not anything that I'm going to test you over, but typography is what we're talking about there. That's an art of these designers, and it shows Paula Scher's design for this rock group called Heatwave on page 240. And the wavy letters that she used, and of course the graphic design there and so on, got the message across about the group. Too hot to handle, right? And it talks about other layouts that are used, but we're not getting into this real deeply, looking at posters that have been designed in the past. And Toulouse-Lautrec did this design for this, for the Moulin Rouge, and George Olden did this design for the 100th year anniversary of emancipation. He did this design in 1963. Shows the chain broken. Very simple, right? But very easy to understand graphic design. And shows trademarks. Trademarks have something, logos and trademarks have something that is a message that identifies with the company. This is a logo for a magazine that was never produced, but mother and child, and you see the word child and the ampersand, that's the little and symbol, inside the rounded O, which is like a mother's womb and a child inside that. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But remember that a logo is short for logotype, but it's a trademark for a company, and it's something that signifies the company you're supposed to identify with it, identify that company. It's a distinctive design that helps us remember the business. IBM is one. Here's their 1972 logo. And it has that on page 244, I think, where it shows the previous logo, and I thought I had that slide, but it dropped out. The image dropped out of this. But then they modernized it, and they've kept changing. And then it talks about motion graphics. And some of you have designed games and done some things like this. But this is very sophisticated, where you're playing these Xbox games or whatever. And they've done all this with actors that have motion capture cameras. And it's very memory intensive to do this, but it's pretty amazing because you feel like you're in the game, right? And you're doing the things, and you turn one direction or the other, and it's made possible by all this amazing technology that they do. But that's part of graphic design too. And so we enjoy those things and the technology there. It goes back a long way. Like we said, I was going to show you this from the papyrus, from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And these symbols, which were their language, and hieroglyphs we'll talk about later. This is Oriental writing. And this, they say that they would put what they called the oracle bones in a fire, and then they would rake them out, and the cracks on the bones meant certain things, because the bones would crack in kind of a natural way, depending on the bone structure. And they say that's how Chinese calligraphy was devised, from some of those cracks in the bones. Have y'all ever heard that? The oracle bones? Anyway, very interesting, and some of you may have written kanji and done some other things. This just shows an old Bible, and using these fonts. This is Albert Dürer. Remember the praying hands? Albert Dürer, the German artist, designed a series of fonts, hand-drawn, hand-lettered with ink. But this shows the development of different font styles from the Gutenberg Bible, 1454, and then the New Roman, Times New Roman and Helvetica. Just have a different feel to them, don't they? And this is one that's called the Universal Typeface. It's in the text, and I'm not following along. But this goes back to the Bauhaus. Now, we'll talk about the Bauhaus later, but I want you to note this. You see that font on the outside of the building? There were two of these schools prior to World War II. They tried to simplify and modernize design, and this is one of the typefaces they came up with, which is known as the Bauhaus style. Adolf Hitler hated it, and he closed the Bauhaus. Thankfully, he didn't destroy the buildings, but the people from there fled to America and Great Britain, and their designs affected designs in these countries. You've seen this before, right? The Chevrolet logo. We call it the bow tie. I don't know how many Chevrolet fans there are, but that was first used in the early 1900s, and we think it came from the Colette's ad for these little coals. People heated their homes with coal fires. Coal burns hot, it burns for a long time, puts out a lot of heat. But that little shape there may have come from this, and it's gone through several changes over the years. Ford is supposedly based on Henry Ford's signature, and that's the Ford name is devised from that. And of course, all kinds of symbols and icons we know, and emoticons we know. I wanted to talk about this real quickly. William Morris, you remember the Crystal Palace I showed you the other day? Some of you said, oh, it's gone, it's completely gone. It was destroyed, it's cast iron. They started modernizing technology so much that William Morris and some other designers came along. They said, we need more natural things. We don't need to modernize it and get rid of nature and the beauty of nature. So they designed what we call the arts and crafts movement. Here's Chaucer, some of you have had to read that, Canterbury Tales and so on. But you see the natural style in that, the leaf patterns and so on, along with the illustrations. You know the impact of a poster like this, right? This is a World War II recruitment poster. It's the idea we talked about foreshortening. Uncle Sam's pointing right at you and saying, I want you. Today's Veterans Day, right? And thankful very much for all those veterans. I was going to bring a Facebook thing put on there about my dad, but we honor those people that have served, and we're thankful for them. But James Montgomery Flagg was hired by the government. He was an illustrator. And they said, we want a recruitment poster that will get people's attention. This one definitely did. Uncle Sam looking pretty tough, right? And saying, I need you, I want you, you need to join up. And people did. And this is just showing some different ways that graphic design is used in printing. I've shown you that before, how they do color separations and then they're all registered together to create that. Have you ever seen the first Apple logo, the first Apple Corporation, Computer Corporation logo? Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, the Steves and these other geniuses got together and worked in the garage to produce the first Apple computer. But this is their idea. See Sir Isaac Newton sitting at the tree, and the apple's about to fall on his head, this idea of gravity. So the Apple computer logo has gone through a lot of changes over the years, still going on. Shepard Fairey is known for this design for the Obama campaign. One of hope, using sort of this pop art design, but that's been appropriated in different ways. When they found out that the different ways that the Obama administration had spied on people, someone came up with this. Yes, we scan. We are watching you. So you see all kinds of things, but everything you have, everything we use, currency, money, and even $100 bill. I had a $100 bill I was going to pass around for you to look at, but they left it at home. Anyway, so graphic design, just think about it when you see all the different products that are out there and things that we notice every day. And I'm going to go back to my disk here and pull up traditional craft media, and we'll finish up with that here, if it opens. But this has the security strip in it, and different inks and special metallized inks and so on. A lot of technology went into designing the currency that we use today. Okay, I'm sorry. I clicked the wrong thing here. Here we go. Y'all bear with me. There it goes. Okay. So now traditional craft media, which is chapter 11 in your text. And let me get to that page. And that's right before architecture. Craft media, crafts we call it. It used to be, when I was a student at Tech, when I was a young student, I was a young student at one time, we had the art department, the fine arts people that were doing painting and printmaking and sculpture. And I walked down by the vending machine one time and I said, what's down there? because we didn't have any classes down there, and said, oh, that's those crafts people. And that was sort of the attitude. And it's like, wait a minute. So I went down there one day and just looked in. I thought, this lady was weaving on a huge loom. And I looked at what she was doing, and she told me how she produced it. And I said, how long have you been working on this? She said, oh, just 3 months. It's like, oh my goodness. There's more to that than just, oh, it's just crafts and it's just something. So we need to think about crafts media as, yes, some people say they're things that are just useful. I'll go through these slides first, which are at the beginning of this chapter, and it shows the amazing Maria Martinez and her husband, and they pronounce that Julian and Maria Martinez over at San Ildefonso Pueblo. You can go outside Santa Fe, just a short drive, 30 minutes away, and you can go in that pueblo, and they have some of the pottery for sale from some of the Indians that are doing this in that same style. But they discovered this pottery that was black on black, and it had not been done in centuries. They discovered it in an archaeological dig. So Maria decided that she would learn how to rediscover this way of making pottery. So you see her there with clay that was native clay. It's a special kind of clay, and it's really a sacred place to them, where they gather this clay on the reservation there. And then making this, smoothing it out with a tool, and then using coils of clay, we'll talk about that, and then producing these clay pieces that are fired in just kind of a crude pit, dug into the ground, using mesquite and pinon pine, and getting a very hot fire. But it's not as hot a fire as you'd have in a kiln, a modern kiln that's electric or gas-fired kiln. What they would do, though, they would take the pottery and then they would paint on it with a thinned out clay, and then they would use a stone, and those stones are handed down for generations, and polish that clay. Some of you have made pottery, right? Done pottery? Have you ever used slip on your pottery? Sometimes it's just used to join pieces together, but they would put that wet clay we call slip on there and polish it, and it would have in the unfired pieces, you could see your reflection in them. But when it's put in that fire, and you've studied reducing or reduction atmospheres, reducing where the oxygen is all burned out, a reduction atmosphere. So what they would do is cover these fires with more and more sticks and leaves and then dirt, and it would just smolder in there. So the carbon atoms would saturate that clay, and it makes it black. You could break it, and you would have black through and through. So there's another picture of Maria and Julian doing one of these clay pots, and he's using a handmade brush to paint on that slip. But when it's finished, it has this beautiful black color to it. And you see the places where he painted on, it's not shiny, but it's this dull, grayish black color. The Tech Museum has a few of these, and they're worth a considerable amount of money. They're all considered art pieces, even though they're craft. They're never made to use. They're made for just, the first ones were used, but then they became considered art pieces. That feather design is just beautifully done, all by hand. Now, some people say crafts involve skill and fine art involved intellect, or you were smarter or more creative or something. And this idea of making stained glass, that was a craft. It was not so much of an art. And so to do a stained glass window like this Annunciation, the angel Gabriel coming to Mary and announcing that she would bear the Christ child, you have that on page 277 in your text. And then this Annunciation panel for an altarpiece, that those are two different things, but they're still, I think the line between craft and fine art is just very blurred. And I'm not sure if it even exists anymore. I don't know if you can see this. I meant to have a slide of this and turn it over. But if you kind of tilt your head, you can see that there's a magnifying glass in front of this that inverts it. This lady said, well, people think of crafts as only women's work, like weaving and sewing and quilting and so on. So she took colored spools of thread and arranged them in a Mona Lisa. And so you can see, and kind of blur your eyes a little bit, you can see the Mona Lisa upside down there in the gallery. They had it so you could see it that way. Your text, and if you're looking in your text, you can see it, page 278. Peter Volkos is featured in his work. He had learned to be a potter and throw on the wheel, and one day he was maybe frustrated, but he said, I wanted to do something different. So he started cutting apart his pot using a wire tool that you use to cut it off the wheel, and began using a knife and just throwing it back together and then firing it. And he had invented something very different and new. And he said, I went from what people were calling my crafts, pottery, to something that was considered an art piece. It wasn't useful like this vase, or beautiful like this vase is, but it was something that was just the artist's expression. Faith Ringgold's beautiful quilt, Tar Beach, from her series. The people up on the roof in New York City, they call it their Tar Beach. We don't have time to travel to the beach, we're going to use the Tar Beach. But her quilts, along with the pictures that she put, using paintings and using the fabric of traditional quilting, and then it shows this altarpiece there, expressing a different idea of these people that were oppressed people. But clay, glass, metal, wood, and fiber, the main things that you use. Earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. You've all seen flower pots, right? That are that kind of orange color. That's earthenware. It's very soft clay. Stoneware, if you have a coffee cup that you could put in the microwave, that's probably stoneware. It's usually earthenware. We have some things that we just don't put them in the microwave. Earthenware can go, but it eventually can have an effect on it being reheated. And then porcelain is the finest, and it's white clay. If you have china at home, it's probably porcelain, and porcelain vases. But porcelain is used for also another very lowly thing. If you go in the bathroom down the hallway or downstairs, the sinks are porcelain and the toilets are porcelain, because it's the most durable clay. It's fired to the highest temperature. It's fired over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So when clay is fired, it becomes what we call vitrified. It becomes glass-like. And you take an unfired piece of clay, and it doesn't make any sound when you break it. But you drop a piece of clay that's been fired, it has that glass-like sound of it breaking. I won't imitate that for you, but anyway, you know it. And coiling, pinching, slab building, wheel throwing. You see them kneading, or we call it, you work a piece of clay by wedging it and get all the air out, and then you can cut it into slabs and put it together, or you can throw it on the wheel, and your text shows these different ways of coiling pottery. But it has to be wet enough that you can join it together. And it's very satisfying. I've had people say, you know, I've always wanted to take a pottery class. Go over and take ceramics here on campus, or campus at Wayland. And I'm not sure if they offer it in Lubbock or not, but anyway, it shows a T-set, and they're using uniform pieces of wood to roll out a slab with a rolling pin, and then build things like this, and then wheel throwing. And it's hard to do, but it's a good skill. Anybody know how to throw on the wheel? All right. Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
I tried it.
You tried it? Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. And you have to have some good upper body strength and brace yourself right to do it, don't you? Yeah. But I admire those things. I've done a few things, and I got pretty good at it because I really wanted to master it. Our pastor had one time, he did the sermon on the potter, and he had me get the potter's wheel up on stage. Some of the old men in our church were saying, "Wait, what are you doing?" But I threw a pot while he was telling about the sermon, and he talked about how the potter controls the clay and so on. So interesting. Glaze is what you put on there. You fire different glazes to give it a certain color, a certain finish, and so it has to be fired twice. We know hot and cold glass. We've seen hot glass with Chihuly and his team and the amazing things they produced. And cold glass is any way of dealing with glass, and of course stained glass is in that too, and stained glass designs, and then metal that could be cast or fabricated and cut and re-soldered, worked by different methods, shapes, different methods, and then carved wood is in crafts. It even shows a bent wood chair here that's used, and then fibers using different animal and vegetable fibers, plant fibers, to do weaving. And not giving this enough time, but you have beautiful tapestries like this, and you have even computer controlled things like this. So you can feed a design into certain computer programs and have it weave something like this portrait, and you have that in your text. Carpet makers have to go through a very difficult procedure to do these carpets, and they tie off and knot these different threads. This shows a Persian weaver, and they usually harvest the material themselves, the wool that they use. They dye it themselves from natural fibers, natural materials, natural all the way to produce these amazing rugs like this in Iran. I've seen some of these rugs on the Antiques Roadshow sell for in the six figures. The museum pieces, they're beautifully done. Basket making and different kinds of weaving. A few years ago, there were some collectors looking for quilts in these old towns in Georgia, and some people say Gee's Bend, or they found these women that were totally unique because it was an isolated community. Some of these were used to protect car engines of cars that were disabled, but these beautiful quilts like this were shown in museums in New York City and other places. So, unique designs, and of course, using all kinds of materials. Here's fabric and thread and so on to create these designs. Porcelain flasks like this are considered beautiful designs, and Wedgwood pottery, glassware. I'm just going to scroll through these real fast. I want to show this, raku firing. Have any of you done that in pottery class? Where you take, this guy's not very smart here because he needs long sleeves and an apron, leather apron on, and a face shield. You can see he's feeling the heat there because it's about 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. I used to do this with my high school class, and we'd do it in an electric film and take it outside and put it in a barrel with the leaves, newspaper, and so on. And it would burn, it catch back on fire again, but you would cover it, and it's a reduction in atmosphere that changes the glazes where the metal oxides come out, and it does these beautiful rainbow effects on them. So raku firing is pretty amazing. Jim Romberg taught me, he taught at Tech for a number of years, and he's pretty well known around the world in collections. My wife and I met doing raku pottery together, so it's kind of special to me too. There's another Peter Vogel's piece. Look at this Jennifer McCurdy piece. She carves and manipulates porcelain to do these amazing designs, and then put gold leaf on the inside. Remember I talked to you about Marilyn Levine? That's one of her ceramic fired pottery pieces, ceramic clay, to look like a leather jacket. If you tapped on it with your fingernail, it'd ring like a piece of pottery. And that's one of her briefcases, and this leather purse, but it's all ceramic. Even these old worn boots are ceramic. And glass work like this has been done for centuries. We talked about stained glass. Remember the name Tiffany? Tiffany and Company. Louis Comfort Tiffany and his team of artists produced these beautiful stained glass windows like this. And they were used in, there's still some in homes, but many of them are museum pieces. And they also produce blown glass like this, these beautiful colors, and lamps like this. I've seen plastic versions of them, not nearly as neat, but Louis Comfort Tiffany, and of course Chihuly we've seen. My wife and I, when we were in London, we made our way to the Victoria and Albert Museum to see the chandelier. You see the size of that space. It's almost 3 stories, that entire museum. but we went up on the upper floor so we could see a better look at this glass chandelier with all these pieces. And there's a guy that comes in there once a year with a special duster to dust all the dust off this, and of course metal work and so on. I'm not gonna ask you a lot of these things on the test. The former text had some of these pieces in there. I just wanted to show you carved wood and so on. And it doesn't even mention fashion design, which I think it should, which is one of the crafts. Any questions real quick before you go? You do want the review before you leave, right? So make sure you get that before you leave. And I'm still working on your Christina's World, our criticism. I'll get those done. Y'all have a good, safe weekend. If you have any questions, email me, and make sure you get one of these before you leave. Thank you again, Amy, for helping. Appreciate it so much. Could you hand one of these back? Y'all take care.